The house on Blackwood Lane * Blackwood Lane was the kind of road people in town avoided after sunset. It wound through a thin stretch of woods where the air always seemed colder, where shadows stayed longer than they should. At its very end stood the farmhouse, a warped, sagging structure that looked like it had been left to rot for decades. The roof dipped in the middle as if it were sinking under the weight of time. Shingles curling like brittle leaves. Faded, paint peeled in jagged strips, revealing an underlayer stained a ruscallard brown that locals swore wasn't just from weather. Windows sat like black eyes in the facade, empty yet watchful. Even in broad daylight, there was something about them that made you feel as if you were being measured, studied, and quietly invited closer. The porch sagged dangerously under the weight of neglect. Each board warped and bowed, yet they held a strange defiance, as if waiting for someone to step on them. The front door, its frame slightly crooked, bore deep gouges near the handle marks that could be from an old lock being forced open, or from something trying to get out. The air around the farmhouse carried a stale heaviness, a blend of damp wood, earth, and something metallic that clung to the back of your throat. Over the years, people whispered about the things they had heard, hear soft dragging sounds on the porch, a faint tapping from behind the walls, the low hum of a voice that never quite formed into words. No one had lived here since the family vanished, but the grass never grew over the narrow path leading to the front steps. It was as though the house itself made sure the way stayed clear, silently anticipating the next set of footsteps, willing to cross the threshold the moment you stepped inside. The first thing that struck you was the smell, thick and clinging, a mix of damp rot, dust, and something sharper, metallic, that immediately brought the thought of blood to mind. The living room seemed frozen in time, furniture coated in a thick layer of dust that muted every color into the same dull gray. It wasn't the dust that unsettled you, though it was the way certain details stood out against it. On the wooden floor near the center of the room, a dark smear stretched toward the hallway, the kind of stain that even years couldn't fade completely. Against the far wall hung an oversized family portrait, its ornate frame chipped and dull. At first glance, it was just a dated photograph of a man, a woman, and 2 children, all dressed neatly, all smiling in the rigid way people did in old pictures. But the longer you looked, the less natural that smile seemed. Their mouths curved upward, yet their eyes were flat, lifeless, as though the expressions had been forced and frozen. The more your gaze lingered, the more you could swear the children's lips were just slightly too red, a shade that didn't belong to natural skin. The faces seemed almost aware of your presence, the painted pupils holding an unnerving focus. The man's hands, resting on his wife's shoulder, had faint streaks across the knuckles, darker than shadow. In the dim light, it looked like dried streaks of something that had once been wet. Even the background of the portrait felt wrong too. Dark, with shapes in the corners that could have been shadows or figures just out of focus. The air in front of it felt cooler, as though the space between you and the frame was subtly occupied by something unseen, quietly waiting for you to step closer at the top of the stairs. The hallway stretched into dimness, its faded wallpaper peeling in long strips that curled toward the floor. A faint creak echoed from somewhere ahead, followed by the slow, rhythmic sound of wood shifting. One door stood half open, the narrow gap spilling a thin slice of shadow across the worn carpet. Pushing it open revealed a small room, lit only by the gray light filtering through a cracked window. In the center sat a wooden rocking chair, swaying gently back and forth without a single breeze in the air. The floor beneath the chair was darker than the rest, and at first it seemed like a shadow, but the edges glistened faintly in the dim light, catching on the movement of the chair's legs. As your eyes adjusted, the truth became clear. It was a pool, thick and dark, its surface sticky and uneven. The smell hit next, coppery and unmistakable, pulling at the back of your throat until swallowing felt heavy. The liquid had seeped into the wood, staining the boards a deep maroon that spread outward like the slow bloom of a flower. A faint drip came from somewhere above, breaking the rhythm of the rocking chair, each droplet sending a tiny ripple across the surface. The walls bore faint splatters, so small they could be missed if you didn't look directly at them, as if something or someone had once been close to the spot where the chair now moved. The chair's legs squeaked faintly with each rock, a sound that seemed to mimic a low, breathy laugh. Even standing still, it was hard to shake the feeling that the motion wasn't left over from some past disturbance, but was being maintained by an unseen presence, keeping time with something. Only it could hear. The trapdoor in the kitchen sat flush with the warped boards, almost hidden except for the rusted iron ring set into its center. It was colder here, the air heavier, the smell different. Damp wood mingled with a sickly sweetness that carried an undertone of decay. Pulling the ring sent a groan through the floor, the sound echoing somewhere deep below. The first breath from the opening was thick, wet, and laced with the unmistakable stench of rotting flesh. The narrow wooden stairs descended into darkness. Each step bowed from years of weight. As the light above faded, the air grew warmer and more oppressive. The smell stronger until it felt like it was seeping into the skin. The beam of a flashlight caught movement on the wall's deep gouges carved into the stone. Some jagged, some oddly deliberate, as though someone had been clawing to get out, or marking the days in silence. Between the grooves were smears of a dark brown red that hadn't fully dried, sticky and glistening under the light. The basement opened into a low-ceilinged space with dirt floors, packed down by countless steps. Against one wall, shapes hung in uneven rows. At first, they seemed like old canvas sheets, but the texture was wrong pale, stretched too tightly, edges curling and splitting in places. It took a moment to recognize them as human skins, some bearing the faint shadow of tattoos, freckles, or scars. A few had thin strips of cloth pinned to them, hand-scrawled names fading into the yellowed surface. In the center of the room sat a rough wooden table, its top darkened and glossy with the residue of long-dried fluids. Tools were scattered across it, hooks, cleavers, blades, dulled and stained beyond cleaning. The floor around it was littered with small fragments, bits of bone, cracked and splintered, a lock of hair tangled around a nail, something that might have once been part of a jaw, teeth still intact. In one shadowed corner, a wooden crate leaned against the wall, its boards swollen from dampness. The edges were dark with what could only be blood, some of it still wet enough to reflect the beam of light. Inside, beneath a layer of stained cloth, lay a human face, the skin unbroken, eyes half open, the pupils glassy yet catching the light in a way that seemed almost aware. The expression was neither peaceful nor afraid, but something in between. Frozen in a moment where breath had been taken and never returned, from the farthest corner of the basement came a sound that didn't belong to any house wet. Dull steps, as though bare feet were moving through something thick and viscous. The light wavered toward it, catching brief flashes of motion that disappeared before they could be identified. The air shifted, carrying a new smell, heavier than the rest. The metallic temps of fresh blood mingled with a rank, animal-like musk. When the shape emerged from the shadows, it wasn't a single figure. The body looked as though it had been stitched together from many other stitches of skin in mismatched tones, crudely joined by thick, black sutures that bulged and tore in places. Some seemed still oozed, a thin, red line trickling down in slow threads. Its frame was towering but uneven, a shoulder higher than the other, the limbs too long for its body, ending in hands where the fingers seemed to have been replaced with sharpened bone. The head was the most grotesque, multiple faces sewn together in a lopsided arrangement, some with eyes missing, others with mouths crudely stitched shut. A few eyes were open, darting in different directions, and one mouth, positioned awkwardly along the jawline, moved in a slow, trembling motion, letting out a wet, rattling breath. With each inhale, the sutures across its chest strained, small beads of blood appearing where the skin threatened to split. It moved closer, and with every step, the ground gave a faint, sucking sound, as if it were pulling itself free from the floor. Hands began to emerge from the dirt around it, dozens of them, pale and blood-stained. Their nails cracked and caked with soil. They clawed upward blindly, gripping at boots, at ankles, at anything warm. The creature didn't look down, as though the reaching hands were part of it, an extension of its own body, rising to hold its prey still. In the low light, it became clear that some of the stitched pieces still twitched faintly, the way a severe muscle spasm. A single droplet of blood fell from its elbow, landing with a soft splash on the ground before spreading into a dark, hungry stain. Its breathing was louder now, wet and gurgling, like something choking slowly but refusing to stop. Each sound accompanied by the subtle tearing of flesh under strain.
Please like and subscribe channel Fear Frequency for more horror stories. Thank you.